Several months after my son got married, my daughter-in-law knocked on my front door with a notary and a heavy leather briefcase. She smiled at me with the slow, exaggerated patience one uses when speaking to someone who is already confused. "Mom," Miranda said, stepping into my living room without waiting for an invitation, "we're here to help you streamline some house paperwork." House paperwork. That was what she called the legal transfer that would sell the home where I had raised my only son. That was what she called moving the proceeds of that sale into a joint trust account that she and my son would legally control. That was what she called the medical proxy forms that would officially declare me incapable of living independently, forcing me into an assisted living facility so they would no longer have to worry about me. My son, Evan, stood behind her near the doorway, unable to look me in the eye. The notary, a sharp-featured man named Cecil, clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a stack of dense legal documents. He placed a heavy gold pen on my coffee table. It lay there, gleaming against the wood like a freshly sharpened knife. "It's just a few signatures, Eloise," Miranda said smoothly, leaning close. "It's a final step for your own protection." That was when I truly understood. They were not trying to protect me. They were trying to erase me. They looked at a 69-year-old widow living in a modest house and saw nothing but an asset to be liquidated. So I let my hand shake as I reached for the pen. I let my eyes fill with tears. I let them believe that the poor old widow was frightened enough to sign her life away. Then the doorbell rang. My best friend, Beatrice, walked right in. Right behind her was Cedric Ames, a ruthless elder asset protection attorney, and Nadia Flores, an investigator from the county prosecutor's office, wearing a badge on her belt. Miranda went dead white. The notary scrambled to close his briefcase, his hands trembling violently. And my son finally looked at me, his eyes wide, as if he had just realized his mother was not the helpless woman his wife had convinced him I was. But the real surprise was still locked inside my bedroom safe, because what none of them knew was that my late husband had left me nearly 500 acres of prime ranch land in eastern Washington, farmland, cattle, a massive 5-bedroom main house, heavy machinery. It was a staggering fortune they had never bothered to ask about because they were too busy assuming I was poor, old, and easy to manage. I walked into my bedroom, carried the heavy ranch deed back into the living room, and laid it on the table right next to their predatory paperwork. I asked my lawyer to read the appraisal aloud. Miranda's mouth fell open. The notary stopped breathing, and I smiled for the first time in months. They came to my house to steal pennies. They left knowing they had permanently locked themselves out of a kingdom. That was the day I learned that silence can be gold. But speaking up at the exact right time is a diamond. My name is Eloise Hartwell. I am 69 years old, and I have lived in Seattle my entire adult life. For nearly 40 years, I was married to Orson Hartwell. We had a good, quiet life. I was the traditional mother. I cooked every meal from scratch, kept the house immaculate, and raised our only son, Evan, with every ounce of love I had. I was the kind of mother who kept my son's childhood drawings in a box under the bed and still made his favorite clam chowder when he visited from college. When Orson passed away 7 years ago, my world shrank. It was just me and Evan. I poured all my remaining energy into supporting him. I believed that if I just loved him enough, he would always remember where his home was. When Evan announced he was engaged to Miranda, I was overjoyed. I thought I was gaining a daughter. I spent 3 days preparing for their welcome dinner. I made my famous clam chowder, baked fresh cornbread, prepared a delicate avocado salad, and finished it with a homemade apple pie. I set the dining room table with the good china and lit candles. When they arrived, Miranda walked through my front door in a tailored silk blouse, smelling of expensive perfume. She didn't hug me. She offered a stiff, formal cheek and handed me a bottle of wine that clearly cost more than my weekly grocery budget. We sat down for dinner. I served the chowder. Miranda took one small spoonful, smiled tightly, and pushed the bowl slightly away from her. Not hungry, dear? I asked gently. Oh, it's lovely, Eloise, Miranda said, her tone dripping with polite condescension. I'm just very particular about my diet. We usually eat at proper restaurants. I honestly don't know how anyone has the time to cook like this anymore. I felt a small prick of hurt, but I brushed it off. It's a labor of love, I smiled. As the evening progressed, I noticed the way Miranda was looking at my house. She wasn't looking at it like a future daughter-in-law getting to know her husband's childhood home. Her eyes were scanning the slightly worn carpet, the dated floral wallpaper, and the popcorn ceiling. She looked like an appraiser evaluating a distressed property. You know, Eloise, Miranda said, sipping her wine, after the wedding, you really should consider downsizing. Having less house to maintain will give you more time for yourself. More time for myself? I asked, confused. I have plenty of time. Well, yes, Miranda said, exchanging a brief, meaningful look with Evan. But Evan and I will be very busy building our life together. We want to make sure you're comfortable on your own. It was a subtle warning, but the message was clear. I was being gently, politely nudged out of my son's future. Before they left, I offered to bake their wedding cake. Baking was my passion, and I wanted to give them something deeply personal. Miranda laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. Oh, Eloise, that is so sweet, she said, pulling on her designer coat. But we've already hired a master pastry chef from downtown. Honestly, homemade is charming for a potluck, but we're going for a very elevated aesthetic. We wouldn't want anything looking amateur. Amateur, I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, the word echoing in my head. 3 months later, the wedding arrived. I bought a beautiful, expensive purple dress for the occasion. I had my hair done. I wanted to look like the proud mother of the groom, a woman who belonged at the center of the celebration. When I arrived at the grand glittering venue, the wedding planner, a frantic woman with an earpiece, checked her clipboard. Hartwell, Eloise, she muttered. Ah, yes. You're seated in row 5 on the groom's side. Row 5. I walked down the aisle, feeling the blood drain from my face. I passed the front row, which was entirely reserved for Miranda's family. I passed the second row, filled with Miranda's college friends. I passed the third and fourth rows, occupied by senior partners from Evans' accounting firm. I was seated in the 5th row, squeezed between Evans' distant cousins and a couple I didn't even recognize. I had been visually and physically removed from the core of my son's life. During the reception, the time came for the speeches. I had spent weeks writing a toast. It was short, sweet, and filled with memories of Orson and my hopes for Evan's future. The DJ announced me simply as Evan's mom, not Eloise, just a generic title. I walked to the microphone, my hands shaking slightly. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I got through the first 2 sentences, mentioning how much Orson would have loved this day. Before I could start the third sentence, Miranda stood up from the head table. She smiled brightly, raised her champagne glass high in the air, and began clapping loudly. "To Orson!" Miranda shouted into the room. Instantly, her bridesmaids joined in. The groomsmen followed. Within seconds, the entire room was clapping and cheering, completely drowning out my voice. The DJ, taking the cue from the bride, faded the microphone and started playing a lively jazz track. I stood there holding my index cards, entirely silenced. My toast had been forcibly amputated. I walked back to my table, feeling a hot, humiliating flush creeping up my neck. Evan didn't look at me. He was too busy smiling at his new wife. When the dancing started, Evan danced with Miranda. Then he danced with Miranda's mother. Then he danced with her two sisters. He never came to my table to ask me to dance. Around midnight, I went to the restroom to gather myself before leaving. As I stood inside one of the stalls, adjusting my dress, I heard the heavy door swing open. Two women walked in, laughing. I recognized Miranda's voice immediately. "I swear, if the photographer takes one more picture of me from the left side, I'm going to scream," Miranda laughed. "You look flawless, babe," her friend replied, "and the wedding is perfect. Although your mother-in-law looks a little intense." I held my breath in the stall. "Ugh, tell me about it," Miranda groaned, the sound of water running in the sink. "She's so suffocating, always trying to insert herself with her homemade cookies and her sad little widow stories. Evan is way too soft on her. Are you going to have to deal with her every weekend?" her friend asked sympathetically. "God, no," Miranda scoffed. "Good thing she lives far away on the other side of town. Once we get her settled into a smaller place, we'll barely have to see her." The water turned off. The door swung shut. I stood in the silence of the bathroom stall, the cold tile pressing against my back. I went home that night alone. I walked into my empty, quiet house, took off my expensive purple dress, and hung it in the closet. I realized then that I wasn't just losing a son to a new marriage. I was being actively, systematically erased. And they had no idea who they were erasing. For the first few months after the honeymoon, Evan barely called. When I called him, our conversations were brief, clipped, and always steered away from personal topics. He was a man firmly under the direction of his new wife. One Saturday afternoon, I baked a batch of my signature chocolate walnut cookies. I put them in a tin and drove to their new townhouse in a trendy, expensive neighborhood. I rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass, I saw a figure approach. The door cracked open just 2 inches, held firmly by a heavy security chain. Miranda looked out at me. She was wearing silk loungewear, holding a mug of coffee. "Eloise," she said, her voice completely devoid of warmth. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," I said, holding up the tin. "I baked some cookies for Evan." Miranda looked at the tin as if I were holding a box of toxic waste. "Evan is at the gym, and we're doing a low-carb cleanse this month. We can't have sugar in the house." "Oh," I said, my smile faltering. "Well, perhaps just for a cheat day." "I really need to get back to my emails, Eloise," Miranda interrupted. She didn't unhook the chain. She didn't invite me in. "Have a safe drive home." The door clicked shut in my face. The deadbolt slid heavily into place. I stood on the porch holding a tin of cookies, realizing that I was no longer a mother visiting her son. I was an unwanted solicitor who had been turned away. That night, I sat in my quiet living room and cried. But as the tears dried, a memory surfaced. A few weeks before Orson died, He had held my hand in his hospital bed. His breathing had been shallow, but his eyes were sharp. "Don't let anyone trample you, Eloise," Orson had whispered. "You are stronger than you think, and you have more than you imagine." At the time, I thought he was just offering emotional comfort. I walked into my bedroom, knelt by the closet, and unlocked the heavy fireproof safe that Orson had insisted we bolt to the floor years ago. I pulled out a stack of old files and life insurance documents. At the very bottom of the safe was a thick sealed manila envelope I hadn't looked at in 7 years. I broke the seal. Inside was a massive stack of legal documents, land surveys, and property deeds. I started reading. I knew Orson had made some investments in Eastern Washington years ago, but we lived so simply that I never paid much attention. I assumed it was a small plot of undeveloped land. I was wrong. It was a fully operational revenue generating property called Cedar Hollow Ranch. It spanned nearly 500 acres of farmland. It included a massive 5-bedroom main house, 3 guest cottages, heavy agricultural machinery, and a substantial herd of cattle leased out to a local managing firm. According to the most recent appraisal, tucked into the back of the file, the property was worth tens of millions of dollars. And looking closely at the deed, I saw the most important detail of all. Orson hadn't put it in a joint family trust. He had put it entirely, exclusively in my name. I sat on the floor of my closet, holding a piece of paper that proved I was not a helpless dependent widow. I was a multimillionaire. I carefully folded the deed, placed it back into the safe, and locked it. I decided right then that I would tell no one, not Evan, not Miranda. If they loved me, they didn't need to know about the money. And if they didn't love me, knowing about the money would only make them dangerous. It didn't take long for the danger to show itself. A few weeks later, Miranda started calling me. The woman who had slammed a door in my face was suddenly very interested in my well-being. She asked pointed questions about the maintenance of my house, the state of my roof, and whether I was finding it overwhelming to live alone. Then Evan came over. He sat on my sofa, looking uncomfortable, twisting a coaster in his hands. "Mom," Evan started, not meeting my eyes. "Miranda and I have been talking. This house, it's too much for you. The stairs are dangerous. The yard work is expensive. We think it's time you seriously considered selling the property and moving into a smaller place, somewhere safe." I listened to him speak, but I didn't hear my son. I heard Miranda's script coming out of his mouth. "I'm perfectly safe here, Evan," I said gently. "You're 69, Mom," he argued, the frustration leaking through. "You're living in the past. We just want to help you manage things before you can't." He left an hour later, leaving behind a glossy brochure for an upscale senior living community. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I picked up the phone and called Beatrice Cole. Beatrice and I had been best friends for 40 years. She was a retired school principal, sharp as a tack, and fiercely protective. I told her everything: the wedding, the cookies, the visit from Evan. "I knew it," Beatrice said over the phone, her voice thick with disgust. "I saw the way she looked at your house during the rehearsal dinner. She has money in her eyes, Eloise. She's calculating your worth." "What do I do, Bea?" I asked. "I'm coming over," she said firmly, "and tomorrow we are going to see a lawyer." The next morning, Beatrice drove me downtown to a sleek law firm. We met with Cedric Ames, a highly recommended attorney who specialized exclusively in elder asset protection. I sat in his office, and laid out exactly what Miranda and Evan had been saying. Cedric leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and nodded slowly. It's a textbook pattern, Mrs. Hartwell, Cedric said, his voice professional but grave. It happens every day. It usually follows 3 steps. First, emotional isolation, cutting you off from your support network. Second, declaring you incapable, convincing you and others that you are too old or confused to manage your own life. Third, presenting a solution that conveniently benefits the predator. He leaned forward, looking me in the eye. They don't want to help you manage your house, Cedric said bluntly. They want to liquidate it, take control of the capital, and put you somewhere you can't interfere. Can they do that? I asked, a cold chill running down my spine. Not if we move first, Cedric said, pulling a legal pad toward him. Over the next 2 hours, Cedric set up an impenetrable, irrevocable trust for my liquid assets and the Cedar Hollow Ranch. We ensured that under no circumstances could Evan or Miranda gain medical or financial power of attorney without Cedric's direct, in-person authorization. You are fully protected, Cedric assured me as we finished. But I suspect they are going to escalate. They are going to present you with paperwork soon. I need you to document everything, every conversation, every threat, every manipulation. Beatrice reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. She slid it across the table to me. I bought this at an electronics store this morning, Beatrice said grimly. Keep it in your pocket, because when that viper strikes, we are going to cut off her head. 2 weeks later, Evan and Miranda returned to my house. I was sitting in the living room, wearing a modest cardigan, sipping tea. The digital recorder was in my pocket, silently capturing every word. They sat across from me on the sofa. Between them rested a thick leather folder. Mom, Evan said, his tone adopting the patronizing, gentle cadence, usually reserved for explaining things to a child. We've been consulting with some financial specialists about your estate. We're very concerned about your long-term security. Financial specialists? I asked mildly. I haven't met with any specialists. We met with them on your behalf, Eloise, Miranda chimed in, smiling that terrifying, polished smile, to save you the stress. The housing market is peaking right now. If you sell this house, we can take the proceeds and roll them into a joint family trust. Evan and I will manage the investments for you. It's completely safe, and it ensures you'll never have to worry about a mortgage or repairs again. But where would I live? I asked, allowing my voice to tremble slightly. Miranda opened the thick folder and pulled out a stack of glossy brochures. We found the perfect place, she said enthusiastically. Sunset Meadows. It's a premier assisted living facility. You'll have a lovely little room, 3 meals a day provided in the dining hall, and 24/7 medical staff on call. I looked at the brochure. It wasn't an independent living community. It was a high care facility designed for people who could no longer feed or bathe themselves. It was a waiting room for death. But I don't need medical staff, I said, looking at Evan. I cook my own meals. I drive my own car. For now, Mom, Evan said softly, reaching out to pat my knee. But what happens if you fall down the stairs? What happens if you forget to turn off the stove? We just want you to be safe. And Sunset Meadows is only 40 minutes from our house. We can visit you whenever we want, whenever they want. Not when I wanted. I would be locked in a room, waiting for them to find the time to visit me. I lowered my eyes, pressing a trembling hand to my forehead. I just don't know, I stammered. playing the part of the overwhelmed, frightened widow to perfection. This is all moving so fast. I need time to think. Miranda's jaw tightened slightly, annoyed by the delay, but she quickly smoothed her expression. Of course, Eloise, take all the time you need, but just know we're doing this because we love you. As soon as they left, I drove straight to Cedric's office and played the recording for him. Cedric listened, his face hardening. They're attempting a full financial takeover. If you sign those papers, you will be giving them total financial and medical power of attorney. They could sell the house and force you into that facility legally. What do we do? I asked. We wait, Cedric said, a predatory glint in his eye. Do not sign anything. Let them bring the paperwork to you, and when they do, call me immediately. The pressure campaign escalated quickly. 3 days later, Miranda called me. Her voice was urgent, breathless with manufactured panic. Eloise, I just got off the phone with the director at Sunset Meadows, Miranda said rapidly. They have a mass wait list, but a room just opened up. If we don't secure it by tomorrow, you might lose your spot entirely. We need to finalize the paperwork. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. All right, Miranda, if you and Evan really think this is best, come over tomorrow morning at 10. Bring the papers. I'll sign them. Oh, Eloise, you're making such a smart decision, Miranda cooed, her relief palpable. We'll be there. I hung up the phone and dialed Cedric. Tomorrow at 10, I said. I'll be there, Cedric replied, and I'll bring the prosecutor's office with me. The next morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Miranda and Evan standing on my porch, but they were not alone. Standing behind them was a tall, sharp-featured man in a gray suit, holding a heavy leather briefcase. Eloise, this is Cecil Vane, Miranda said smoothly, gesturing to the man. He's a mobile notary. He's here to make sure everything is completely official and legally binding, so you don't have to travel downtown. A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hartwell, Cecil said, offering a practiced, professional smile. I invited them in. They moved like vultures, taking over my living room. Cecil sat in Orson's old armchair, unlatched his briefcase, and pulled out a towering stack of legal documents. He placed them on my coffee table, meticulously aligning the edges. Then he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a heavy, gleaming gold pen. He set it on top of the documents. Before we begin, Mrs. Hartwell, Cecil said in a smooth, practiced voice, reaching into his briefcase again. He pulled out a small digital camera and set it on a tripod. Standard procedure for estate transfers of this magnitude involving elderly clients. I will be recording the audio and video of this signing just to protect all parties and ensure there is no question of your competency or willingness. I looked at the camera. He was creating his own evidence to protect himself in case anyone ever questioned the legality of the theft. Of course, I said mildly. Whatever you need. Excellent. Cecil smiled, pressing the record button. Now, this first document is the deed transfer for this property. The second is the establishment of the joint family trust. Could you read the clauses regarding medical authority? I interrupted, my voice shaking slightly. Cecil exchanged a quick, annoyed glance with Miranda. He cleared his throat. Certainly. Section 4 stipulates that in the event you become incapacitated, Evan and Miranda Hartwell will assume full medical and financial power of attorney, granting them the authority to make residential and healthcare decisions on your behalf. And if I change my mind later? I asked, looking at Miranda with wide, frightened eyes. Can I reverse it? Miranda leaned forward, placing a comforting hand over mine. Eloise, this is an irrevocable trust. We set it up that way for your protection, to make sure no bad actors can ever take advantage of you. Once you sign, it's final. No bad actors. I looked at my son. Evan was staring at the floor, absolutely refusing to meet my eyes. He knew exactly what this was. He knew they were stealing my home and locking me away, and he was too cowardly to stop his wife. I felt a genuine hot tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't an act. It was the profound grief of a mother realizing her son was lost to her. All right, I whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand to pick up the gold pen. I brought the tip of the pen a fraction of an inch from the paper. The doorbell rang. The sharp ring of the doorbell shattered the tense silence in the living room. Miranda frowned, irritated by the interruption. Are you expecting someone, Eloise? I'll get it, I said smoothly, setting the gold pen down on the table. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. Beatrice marched in first, her face set like stone. Right behind her was Cedric Ames, wearing an immaculate bespoke suit, carrying a slim leather folder. And bringing up the rear was Nadia Flores, a sharp-eyed woman in a blazer with a silver investigator's badge clipped to her belt. Miranda went completely white. She stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. Cecil Vane, the notary, froze. His eyes darted from Cedric's expensive suit to Nadia's badge. With practiced, frantic speed, he reached for his briefcase and started shoving the documents inside. Leave the paperwork on the table, Mr. Vane, Cedric said, his voice echoing through the room with absolute authority. Cecil's hands stopped moving. He slowly pulled his hands back, leaving the stack of paper exactly where it was. What is going on here? Evan stammered, stepping in front of his wife, finally finding his voice. Who are you people? My name is Cedric Ames, Cedric said, stepping into the center of the living room. I am retained counsel for Mrs. Eloise Hartwell, specializing in elder asset protection. And this is Investigator Flores from the county prosecutor's office. Nadia pulled a small professional camera from her pocket and clicked it on. Investigator? Miranda gasped, her voice shrill with sudden panic. There is no need for an investigator. This is a private family matter. We are simply helping my mother-in-law streamline her estate. What paperwork are you having her sign, Mrs. Hartwell? Nadia asked coolly, stepping up to the coffee table and looking down at the documents. It's just standard trust transfers. Cecil Vane stuttered, sweating profusely. I was retained purely as a neutral notary. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the digital recorder Beatrice had given me, and set it firmly on top of their paperwork. Let's say it plainly, shall we? I said, looking directly at Miranda. My voice didn't tremble. I wasn't the sweet, confused widow anymore. I was Eloise Hartwell. The paperwork on this table, I stated clearly, forces the sale of this house. It transfers the entire sum of my liquid assets into an account controlled by Evan and Miranda. And it contains incapacity clauses designed to strip me of my medical rights so they can legally confine me to a high care facility. Mom, no! Evan cried, his face pale with horror. It's not like that. We just wanted you to be safe. I am safe, Evan, I said coldly. I turned and walked into my bedroom. I opened the safe, retrieved the thick manila envelope containing the Cedar Hollow Ranch deed, and walked back into the living room. I dropped the heavy envelope onto the coffee table, right next to their predatory trust papers. Cedric, I said, please read the appraisal out loud. Cedric opened the envelope, pulled out the certified appraisal document, and cleared his throat. Cedar Hollow Ranch, Cedric read clearly. 486 acres of operational agricultural and residential property located in eastern Washington, including the main estate, 3 guest properties, heavy machinery, and livestock. The total appraised value is $24,600,000. Sole title holder, Eloise Hartwell. The silence in the room was absolute. Miranda stared at the deed, her mouth hanging open in complete paralyzing shock. She looked from the paper to me and back to the paper. Her eyes bulged as the reality of the numbers hit her. $24 million. And yet, I said softly, breaking the silence, you were both so deeply concerned about my poverty. You were so worried about my incompetence. Mom, we didn't know, Evan whispered, staring at the deed as if it were an alien artifact. I know you didn't, I said, and because you didn't know, you showed me exactly who you are. If you had known about the ranch, Miranda would have been the perfect daughter-in-law. You would have visited every Sunday. You would have let me bake the wedding cake. But you thought I only had this little house. So you tried to steal it. Please? Miranda babbled, stepping forward, her eyes wide with desperation, the greed practically vibrating in her voice. This is a misunderstanding. We can tear these papers up right now. We can go to the ranch. We can help you manage it. The ranch is already protected, Cedric interrupted coldly. Mrs. Hartwell placed Cedar Hollow and all her liquid assets into an irrevocable trust a week ago. Neither of you will ever have the authority to touch a single blade of grass on that property. Miranda looked at Cedric, then at me. The mask completely fell away. Her face contorted into an ugly, furious sneer. She had played a vicious game for a few $100,000, only to realize she had permanently locked herself out of a multi-million-dollar empire. Mr. Vane, Nadia Flores said sharply, turning to the notary. Step away from the table. My office will be taking these documents into evidence. We are opening a formal investigation into coercive real estate transfers. I strongly suggest you retain a lawyer. Cecil Vane grabbed his empty briefcase and practically sprinted out the front door, leaving his expensive gold pen behind. This is ridiculous, Miranda hissed, grabbing her purse. She looked at Evan. Let's go, Evan. Let the crazy old woman keep her secrets. Miranda stormed out the door. Evan didn't follow her immediately. He stood in the middle of my living room, looking at me. He looked shattered. The reality of what he had almost allowed his wife to do to his mother had finally broken through his complacency. Mom, Evan choked out, tears pooling in his eyes. I am so sorry. I looked at my son. I loved him, but love does not require a mother to become a victim. Go home, Evan, I said quietly. We'll talk when you figure out what kind of man you want to be. 3 months later, I sat on the expansive wraparound porch of the Cedar Hollow main house. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple, casting a warm glow over the hundreds of acres that stretched out before me. Today was my 70th birthday, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free. Evan's car pulled up the long gravel driveway. He was alone. He had filed for divorce from Miranda a month ago, shortly after the prosecutor's office subpoenaed her financial records. She had packed her bags and left town, furious that she couldn't get her hands on the trust. Cecil Vane, the notary, had his license permanently revoked, and the investigation had uncovered a network of fraudulent transfers targeting elderly widows. Evan walked up the porch steps, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. He looked humbled, quiet, and deeply ashamed. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said softly, handing me the flowers. "Thank you, Evan," I said, accepting them. He sat in the chair next to me, looking out over the ranch. He came here every weekend now. He didn't ask for money. He didn't offer advice. He simply helped repair fences, chopped wood, and tried to earn back the trust he had broken. Forgiveness isn't something you can ask for with words. It is something that must be built with action. And he was trying to build it. The front door of the main house opened, and Beatrice walked out, carrying a tray of iced tea. She had moved into one of the guest houses 2 months ago. We were chosen sisters, living out our golden years on our own terms. Following closely behind Beatrice was Lillian Moore. Lillian was 73. I had met her through Cedric. Her children had tried to declare her incompetent to control her late husband's pension. When Cedric took her case, I invited her to come live at the ranch while the legal battle was sorted out. Cedar Hollow wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was becoming a refuge. The Cedar Hollow Elder Rights Haven, a safe fortress for older women who had been manipulated, isolated, and threatened by the very people who were supposed to love them. Lillian sat down in a rocking chair, took a glass of iced tea, and smiled at me. The fear that had clouded her eyes for months was finally gone. I looked out over my land. I looked at my best friend, my son who was finally learning how to be a man, and the woman whose life we had helped save. People think that getting old means fading away. They think that a widow in a cardigan is helpless. But dignity has no expiration date. And sometimes the quietest women carry the heaviest armor. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story gave you something to think about, please leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss the stories to come.